Okay. Hello, friend. So
Hi,
happy to
how
see
are
you.
you?
I
Great to
am.
see you.
I'm so happy to see you. I'm so happy to see you.
Me too. It's been way too long.
First of many, I think that, you know, talk about what you're craving. I feel like this idea of, I think, was it at our friend's memorial that you were talking about your book? Because I feel like I was somewhere and you were talking about it. Let me tell you, while we're up,
Yeah.
you were the MC of our friend Patricia's memorial. Was that what you would call it? Like
Oh my
like a
gosh.
master of ceremonies?
Yeah, I think so.
Let me
I think
tell
it's
you,
such a
friends listening, may you all be memorialized in the way that our dear beloved friend, I could cry talking about it, Patricia, was memorialized. It is the way that we should be celebrating. I mean, it was so beautiful. And you were like the lead and you were so amazing. It's just like, this is what I love about you, scholar, writer, teacher, activist, master of
Funeral MC.
ceremonies, intensati
Yeah,
instructor. Like, what don't you do? Like, you really are someone you want to have in the back pocket. You're a back
that's
pocket
really
friend.
kind. There are many things I'm not very good at. Trust me, we could spend about 10 podcasts talking about that.
Could we bring your family in? They'd be like, no,
Yeah,
here you go.
yeah, no, seriously. Thank you though. It's so kind. And yeah, Patricia Moreno, my God, it was such an honor to step into, I guess, MC that event. But I agree. Like my biggest regret was she wasn't there, of
I
course.
literally was thinking that, I flew in for 30 hours and I was like, this was the smartest 30 hours. I know it was so sad to not be there,
You would
but
have loved
wow.
it.
I don't think so. I think you agree with this. She was there.
She was there. Her presence
Her
like
presence.
suffused the place. I kept forgetting she wasn't there because she was so there. But like, a big event, like all about her, fitness through the ages, all these people sweating and happy and loving and spiritual together.
Yeah.
I mean, this was like how she would have wanted it.
Post COVID and hugging. And I cried the whole thing. I cried beginning, middle.
Yeah.
You were amazing.
Thanks.
And we were just talking before we were recording about intensati, which I talk about excessively when I do my intro. But I was saying I became an intensati instructor last year. You've been an intensati instructor among all of your other accolades, what, forever?
2007, I got certified. So it's crazy. 15 years. I was part of like the second, technically the second training group, but like part of like the very early group. Like we would like meet in Starbucks.
Yeah. And so even when I'm teaching, I think, well, there's no way. I don't even understand why I'm doing this. And I'm certainly not going to feel better. This feels a little lame to me when I'm teaching it before I start teaching it. And then I'm like, the minute it starts, I'm like a different person. And I really think it's changed me in my insides because I do it every week.
I feel the same exact way. And like for me, for teaching, I don't teach as frequently now because I have all these other things going on. And like, I always get excited to like book a class that I'm going to teach. And then as it approaches, I'm like, what am I doing? I have so many things to do. Am I even making this playlist is so annoying. Is anyone going to show up? Like, why am I holding on to this fitness thing that's from like another moment in my life? The minute that the music starts, I don't care if there are 5 people in there or 50 people in there. It is like, and it lifts me up and it brought back sort of on this cellular level to every class I've been in that like, I feel changed me so much too. Even talking about it to you, like no one can see us right now, but my whole like spirit and smile lifts. That practice really changed my life. And
I think
like,
so.
Yeah, I'm like kind of like a skeptical, cynical, very in my head
1000%
type of person, and it really changed so much for me. So
I can't wait to talk about your book.
Thank you,
y'all. We like this book. I was just having this thought about your book because it's coming out in December. I was like, what is the message of giving that to everyone I know? For the holidays.
That's the best idea ever. No, it's not. So like, to tell your listeners a little bit, it is a book about
let's tell them
fitness.
What the name is. So I guess I already said it in the intro, but Fit Nation, the gains and pains of America's exercise obsession. I want to talk about that endlessly. I also want to say I am recovering in a very serious way from exercise bulimia. And I have and so it's a fascinating concept to me how deeply you've researched this idea and how we're not really getting better, right? It's, to me, I feel like we're getting sicker and it's getting more evolved. And I know you have so many thoughts on all of it.
Yeah, we're getting different. We are moving forward. I don't think we're always moving in a better direction, but things are definitely evolving. And, I got interested in this book because I'm a historian, I'm a scholar, I'm very like traditionally trained in a lot of ways. My expertise is in 20th century America, politics and culture. I always had these kind of two aspects of my life as a kind of young adult and adult where I was like, a professor and in my head and doing this cerebral work. And then I had this like body life, right? I was this gym rat. I love group fitness. I was training for marathons. After a very unathletic childhood, I had really found fitness as something that like filled me up in a really important way as a grown-up. And so this book came out of like a couple of experiences where those things intersected, where, one, like American exercise culture is like a product really of the 20th century. That's the era that I study. So it like wasn't that weird to focus on it. But I also was like spending so much time in the gym, like just in my regular life. And I realized like there's a lot going on here. Some of it I love.
Say the least.
Yes. And is so powerful and wonderful. And like that deserves some attention in a kind of smart way. And I'm like, but then there's a lot of like kind of like weird and troubling and disturbing stuff that happens here in terms of body image, in terms of socioeconomic access, all that. And like my scholarly world wasn't engaging much with this fitness world at all, which like, on the one hand, I think a lot of that came from the fact of like, oh, who would do a study of like the gym? That's like silly and sort of, consumer culture and it's the body. And we're interested in like, kind of things that are more traditionally seen as legitimately historical. And then the people who were engaging with it tended to be very like, oh, the gym, only a part of patriarchal oppression and like, consumerist narcissism. Like, okay, we're done analyzing that. I'm like, yes, and there's a lot happening there.
Yes, and.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I got into this research almost a decade ago. Like I have really been doing this work for a long time now. So it's nice to see the project come to fruition.
I'm so excited for you. I like to talk during my podcast, but I got to tell you, I just want to listen to you mostly. Like,
no, you talk.
Well, I was just having this thought about when I was in high school. I actually relate so much to what you're saying. I was the most unathletic. I still don't even know how to do a cartwheel because I was such a chunky kid for so long. And so I, would get sick for the mile run. I couldn't do a cartwheel. I was always the heaviest kid. And I actually too got really into fitness. And I remember joining Jack LaLanne in Portchester. And it was like me, and I'd see like my friend John Tager's dad there. But I want to say I was literally only doing it because I wanted to lose weight.
Yes. So can I ask how old you are or around what year?
Yeah, sure. I'm turning 45 on August 30th. Mark your calendars, everyone. I'm open to all exciting posts about my awesomeness. Okay, next.
Happy almost birthday. Okay,
Thank
so we're
you.
about the same age. I'm 43.
Yes,
and there's so much in what you're saying, which I think is really important and is part of what I study in the book. One is the experience of like PE and organized sports as totally alienating for a lot of people.
Traumatizing.
Totally. I mean, when I say I'm writing this book, people usually come to me with like their PE trauma stories. And I was like that too. I thought of myself as chunky. I wasn't necessarily when I look back, but that was kind of my image of myself. But I definitely was invested in this idea of myself as like, well, you're good at school. So I guess like you can't be good at these other things. And I wasn't. I was uncoordinated. I was slow. I was like inflexible. I was always trying to get out of PE. And it was in high school when I couldn't take the humiliation any longer for this reason, not even an activity we did in PE class, but when at the beginning of class, they'd have these bleachers that were closed up and they'd be like, oh, go like sit up on the bleachers and you had to pull yourself up. And I was like sweating.
Oh my God, I want to throw up listening to the story. I'm like, I can't do it. I can't.
all day. And I was like, I had a lot going on. I had friends. I was good at school. I would be like, I hope she doesn't tell us to get up on the bleachers. Like, I'm not going to be able to pull myself up. I'm going to be like this heaving, sweating thing.
So
anyway,
true.
had to get a PE. I'm getting back to like your great story, which is that I found out in my high school, you could do an independent study in physical
We
education.
literally have the same story. And I was doing step aerobics. Yeah. I love step aerobics.
Oh my God. So here's where we're going. So they said, you can do an independent study. No one's ever asked to do this. It has to be supervised, can't be sports. I'm like, don't worry, not going to be sports. And we belong to the Jewish Community Center. And my parents were like, well, you can't have a personal trainer because that's for rich people, very new in the 90s. But they have these step aerobics classes. I'm like, what is that? And they're like, well, it's like a class, go in there. I went in there. And also I was like the youngest by like 15 years. Like in those days, like I feel for teenage girls, there was sports or there was dance, both very competitive and kind of you try out and, you know, you make it or you don't.
Yep.
Yeah. And this was this world to me that holy shit, just like opened my eyes. I felt at home. I could move my body, music, all of this. That said, being a 16-year-old girl in whatever, 1994, pretty quickly it took a turn that I would like skip dinner to stack 3 classes. I was like, so there, it wasn't the healthiest. It introduced me to something I adored. And I realized like, wow, if I put the intention that I put into my schoolwork, into my body and into this part of my life, like I can also feel successful and happy here. But being a teenager in 1996 with all the stuff we were, 1994 with all the stuff that we were experiencing, you know, I was way too obsessed, you know, was restricting food and it was not an altogether healthy experience.
Well, because I want to hear about some of the historical, like how we got here, but I need to, because I know you and me, like I need to make sure we start to understand, because like my main issue in life right now is this polarization of anti-diet culture and diet culture, and how, you know, where fitness lives in diet culture is like very obvious, and macros and grind and, you know, push yourself to the limit and exercise bulimia as a method of life. Right.
Yeah.
And then there's like anti-diet culture, which I imagine, you know, which I think is fine, maybe says gentle walking or something like that. And that we just have this imbalance. And the amount of times that I've been with people thinking about exercise as a method in which to lose weight. Well, I'm an eating disorder specialist. So people will say, well, I exercise. And I'm sort of like, well, the motive, I want to understand your motive. And, you know, if we're talking about food and eating, that's not in the same category. And just like how we've gotten into this deep obsession, and not all of it's bad.
Yeah.
So talk me through that, sister.
Yeah. So the first thing I think is really important to highlight that you illuminate in your comments there is like, right now, I do not feel like we have a productive or nuanced way of talking about weight loss. Like we really don't. Like it is so challenging. And I feel like being in my 40s, this comes up more and more in kind of casual conversations. I mean, granted, these are like evocative of the particular circles that I run in, but there is this like really troubling dynamic that we have right now, where I think there is this wonderful correction we've had to kind of extreme diet, weight loss, thin at any cost, approach to food and to exercise. Like, I'm so happy that we're done with that. But
I'm not sure we're done with it, Natalia.
Well, no.
But at least we're highlighting like that.
We're not done with that. I'm saying in my little in your little circle, like I don't know anyone who's like, all I want is to be thin and like rich. Maybe they feel that way, but like that kind of
it's not so cool to say out loud anymore.
Absolutely. But that being said, like I have had quite a few conversations with women who are like, I don't feel comfortable admitting that I actually want to lose weight. Like, and it's not because I'm so obsessed with my aesthetics, but like, I feel better when I lose a few pounds, et cetera. But I don't feel that we have a productive way to talk about that doesn't like make it seem like, oh, you're failing to love your body, or you're a sellout to feminism, or, and so.
Yes. I might add, I want to say, and even people who are, I heard saying like maybe, I don't want to say normal weighted. I can't think of a better way to say it, but sort of you're talking about, maybe people who are in a, BMI, probably shouldn't talk about that either. So you can't even talk anymore. But I'm saying when people are 100 pounds overweight, they're still being shamed to want to, like the words I actually use are release the weight. I don't like to even use the word weight loss. It just has so much, analytical and whatever. But I think, Cause I just know for me, like when I weighed 325 pounds, like I can tell you without beyond a shadow of a doubt, with every bit of intuition and wisdom inside of me, I was not in the body that I was supposed to be in. Like, period. And I was not
Yeah.
doing
And
things to that body. You know, the way that I was in that body was not in any way that is loving. And then I think we
right.
get into these nuances, and it's really hard to talk about anything anymore, right?
And I feel it would be very condescending of me to be like, oh no, Molly, you just felt that way because you had internalized social anti-fat attitudes, which you probably have, like all of us have. But like,
Absolutely. I
who
live
am
here.
I right? Who am I to say, no, that really was the right body, and now you have starved yourself into like what you shouldn't be, and like to me. And so there are versions of that conversation that get played out, and it's hard. I'm like, I've never struggled with my weight in the way that a lot of people have. Trust me, I've been someone who's thought about her weight, like,
Yeah, right.
probably way too much, because that's sort of like a rite of passage, unfortunately, as a woman in our society. But I'm aware of the relative thin privilege that I have. But I do wish we could move to a kind of more nuanced position. But you asked me about history. Sorry, but I'll let you respond.
No, I love it. I just want to say one more thing, because I do actually think, right, it's like these polarized views, because I also think on the other hand, it is really killing people spiritually with a hyper obsession about, like, there's sometimes a need and a real intuitive knowing to release weight. And then there is this hyper focus obsession that is like a thief, a spiritual thief.
Well, I think spiritual is a good term to use. One of the kind of themes that I trace in the book and that I think about every day as a human, as a mom, is like the moralizing discourse around weight and around fat and around exercise and about all of this. And I think that like one of the things that ratchets
Can you just
up,
say what you mean by the moralizing of it?
yeah,
I just want to unpack what that means for everybody
totally.
listening.
Right. So it's so part of the way we talk and what we hear that like you might not even notice it. But every time you eat like kale and are like, oh, I'm being good, or you see some chocolate cake that's marketed as sinful delight, or you hear certain foods being marked as clean eating, or you talk about detoxifying, or you talk about purity, right? All of this
So it's just like living in America.
Yeah, but all of this is a language of moralizing, right? It is not saying in a kind of, I think, dispassionate or clinical way, hey, this number of calories or this many grams of sugar or fat, et cetera. And there are different ways. I'm not a nutritionist, but you know much better than I to clock this, but it is investing your body size and your consumption to moral behaviors in a way that like ratchets up the stakes that I think are like so damaging. So for me, and this is just me, like I've tried to, my big thing has been to kind of like move away from the like, ugh, I'm so bad, or if I was better, you know, and instead to be like, okay, so that cake tasted really good. If I, want to.
No, the other one, which is like the promoting of bulimia. Like I just think about Thanksgiving and how many Instagram feeds I get where it's like, work out with us before, like work off this, like where I'm like, that is like legitimately criteria of bulimia, like
totally
compensatory behavior. Yeah, the penance.
Totally. Right. It is. I mean, and again, it like, I'm probably thinking maybe too much in a religious framework, but like you do penance for your sins, right? And that sin is, that sin is consumption. And so you discipline the body by burning it off. I mean, so to get a little bit.
How did we get here? How did we get here?
The subtitle is Gains and Pains of America's Fitness Obsession, Workout Exercise Obsession, one of those. And like spirituality is a big piece of that. And so the big like narrative arc of the book is I take us over about 100+ years, and I take us from a moment. It begins in a moment when working out was weird. If you were someone who went to the gym and devoted yourself to cultivating your body, that made you very strange, deviant even. And that was categorized as deviant in different ways for men and women. But, for men are supposed to be preoccupied with the life of the mind. Any man who cares about his body so much is like probably gay, especially if he's hanging out in, gyms at that time where these like dank basement like environments. Why would he want to hang out like with all these semi-clothed men? Yeah. Before though, I'm talking like, 1890s, like 1920s, but like very male. And a lot of them, by the way, did give cover to men who sought sex with men, because you being gay was criminalized then. You couldn't go to a gay bar. Like, this is in a very different moment. So it's not that these weren't places for men to meet each other, but just wanting to participate in that made you suspicious. And for women, the assumption was, well, exercise will make you look masculine because you'll develop muscles. Also, your uterus will fall out. You won't be able to have babies. And it develops unladylike qualities like competitiveness and individualism and strength. So, like, a lot of barriers to kind of where we are today, where we look at working out as virtue, as virtuous. So it kind of starts there, and then it takes us to, how did we get to a place today when we look at exercise as virtuous, and like to say, oh, I work out or I run marathons, that's seen as displaying your essential goodness in a lot of ways. Oh, she runs marathons, she must be so organized. Oh, she looks like she has a fit body, she must be in control of her life. Like those kind of things. So that's one big arc. And then the other big arc, which is sort of, very interwoven, but a little bit paradoxical, is, okay, so we've come to embrace exercise as like important to being a wholly actualized person in America, but we've made it essentially a private good. We've cut physical education or made it so traumatic that kids like us can't stand it. And then like more athletic kids think it's a waste because it's not like rigorous for them, too rigorous for us. Right. So we've like hollowed out or made basically ineffectual physical education. We have defunded all kinds of public parks, recreation, swimming pools, running trails, all the rest, or centered them in rich neighborhoods. And we have only, and as a private industry has grown, that's great. And I love that industry in many ways, but that private industry does not have the provision of fitness in a democratic way at its core. It has profit at its core, right? So it has proliferated and more people have access and are participating, but this is not fitness as a human right or a civic good. It's as a consumer product. So I weave those two stories together over like 120 plus years. We've got like a lot of case studies like Jazzercise and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Muscle Beach and Pilates and Jack LaLanne and like, all of these, Jane Fonda, of course, CrossFit, Peloton, like it's all in there. So it's not all in there, I should say. Like, I'm sure if you're looking for like your favorite gym story, you might not find it, but I try to include enough different kinds of stories about different players in the fitness world to kind of show how this happened.
Well, can you give us a little sneak peek that we could maybe, I was thinking about, I always like to leave people with a verb, not a noun. And I think there's like a thing to do instead of a thing to think, like, and I was thinking about like, well, if we could understand where the history started to hold us hostage, maybe we could see that and not have to buy into all of this. Like, where did that happen? Let's just talk about, identifying women in this way or that feminine space. Like, where did that happen where we became held so hostage by having to have these perfect bodies via exercise?
Yeah, no, it's really important. So there's not one moment, it's kind of a process, which is such a historian's answer, but it is something really to think about, because let me give you a little bit of a longer answer.
Give a long answer. I'm so excited.
So we started off by talking in some ways about the negative pressures to exercise today, right? And how like damaging it can be. And I think that's such a hallmark of the era that you and I grew up in, right? That like one of the pressures of our life was not only to be cute and sexy and funny and smart, but also to be fit, right? That is a pressure that women before us did not have. And I think it's super interesting to think that that pressure in many ways came from liberation. It came in many ways from liberation from the idea that women were too weak to exercise. Women could not be strong. And I think that the mixed legacy in this case of the fitness industry and the rise of fitness culture is, on the one hand, it's created these opportunities for women to be more than frail and pretty and delicate and like outside of physical culture. But at the same time, that fitness culture has incorporated women in such a sense that empowerment is hardly the only legacy. It's just a new way of having to be thin, having to have a particular kind of body, having to do more work on yourself. And like, there are all these interesting examples that show like how that happened. I mean, one example that I think is really interesting is in the Jack LaLanne era. So you went to a Jack LaLanne club, but before he was licensing his name to clubs, he was most famous for having this TV show. And it was on every morning at 9:30 in the 1950s. It was really the first TV show. Sorry, it was really the first TV show where exercise was shown on television, but also where women were expected to put aside their ironing or their laundry and actually to take time to exercise. Sounds great, me time, etc. Right? But he spoke in a very kind of positive, empowering way, but there was this dark underbelly to it, which was basically like, aging is a choice.
Yeah.
If you let yourself go, you have no one to blame but yourself, because I am showing you the tools right here every day to keep yourself young and beautiful and healthy and fit. And if you don't do it, you have no one to blame but yourself.
Wow. So it started that victim shaming.
For sure. And also, but wrapped up in this like sort of empowering thing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I think that we have seen throughout history, and it evolves. Like, one of the things that I think is super interesting, I call it like the birth of the hot wife paradigm, is that you see in like the 1960s, pretty much, that there is the sense that no longer after 30, and it really was 30, are you to be ugly and matronly and unattractive and, you know, like be after your prime years. Shifts to 40 a little bit later. But if you exercise, you can be pretty much longer and continue to have the attention of your husband. And so there are these headlines like, for the missus who would rather be whistle bait than matronly. And on the one hand, it's like, oh, women can keep being sexy and appealing. Great. On the other hand, oh God, now there's this pressure to keep being sexy and appealing, you know, be like,
well, and I think that, I mean, that still exists, right? Because I remember in some meeting I was in, you know, I always get so sad that breaking up with sugar was, you know, like in the diet book, and it had to come out in January because, you know, I wrote it like, this is not a diet, and it still is a diet book. And they were saying something about, you know, like April bikini season. And then I was thinking about all that like perfect body, bikini body, but this like keeping women down happened before exercise. So before this pushing of exercise, was it food? Is that telling people?
Oh, yeah. So what in the 1920s, you start seeing like a lot of kind of advice to women on disciplining their bodies. And at that point, it is almost always about food restriction. And so they called it reducing. Reducing was losing weight. And it was pretty much about like not overindulging in food. And they made very clear there was like some exercise recommended, but it always said not too vigorous. Like, they didn't want women to work out too hard because that would make you, like I said, unladylike and was unattractive. It was seen as unseemly, like as uncivilized.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think it's like interesting to me because it's just like such a mixed bag. Like, that's what the gains and pains, right? Like there really are. I mean, I think a living example of the fact that like there's wonderful, empowering, liberating stuff that can come from exercise and from the expansion of this culture.
We both teach the most beautiful version of exercise. I mean, and I always say to people in my intensity class, I'm like, you know, lovingly push yourself, right? You push yourself to a place where you want to come back next week. And maybe sometimes that even means sitting down, right?
Absolutely.
I have a pitcher's injury in my arm from yoga. I have such bulimia in all of this.
Yeah. And I think though, right. But at the same time, there are all the pains of this expansion and all the new pressures that it has created. And I think in terms of like women, but increasingly straight men too, this like pressure to discipline your body and pressure to look a particular way through exercise has only expanded. And I say straight men because gay men were in it way before straight men.
But, as always.
Yeah. But straight men were really liberated from like all of this until relatively recently. Like
when
the idea that
when was the men's movement of this?
You start to see really like in the 70s, it's kind of contested, but men are going to health clubs more and straight men are going to health clubs more and more. You see some like think pieces from men, some of which I quote in the book, that are like just because I have a skincare routine and I like to exercise doesn't mean I'm effeminate. And it's like, okay, dude, I would never think that in 2022, but they have to kind of do the work of normalizing this as a straight male activity. And I think that only progresses at pace throughout the 80s and 90s. But a big thing that changes it, I think, is when you start seeing the fitness industry adopt a lot of kind of sports-based activities, because so much of the fitness industry, aside from kind of heavy lifting, which is narrow in a particular way, so much of the fitness industry really came out of like the dance world and was so much focused to women. But once you have, particularly in the 90s, like step, which combines interval training and isn't always as like music based. You have spinning, which cycling like totally takes you out of that world. And is also seen as like really sport adjacent. You have like triathlons that become kind of a more, not just for elite athletes. All of that kind of like brings straight men into this in a way that they weren't before.
Huh. And then, so if you had to say, I was just having this memory, I guess I should say it since we're on the podcast, because I guess I was just also thinking about when you're talking about more socioeconomic exclusion, I was having this memory. Apologies. This is like my therapy session with my friend Natalia. I was the fitness coordinator at Cornell Fitness Center. So I worked my way through college. And then I also worked at another gym, Ithaca Fitness Center. And in my senior year of college, I gained a tremendous amount of weight. I probably gained like 70 pounds that year. And I was a great aerobics instructor, a great kickboxing instructor too. Those were so fun. Weren't those years fun?
I love that stuff. Yeah.
And they fired me at the fitness center. They had a lot of complaints about me being out of breath while I was teaching, and they straight fired me, and I called my uncle, who's a lawyer, and he kind of said, I don't think we can win. He said, I don't think we can win. I don't think it's worth winning. And I don't know why I wanted to tell you that, but I'm sure you have very interesting thoughts on it.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's interesting. The complaint was you're out of breath, not that you don't look fit.
Well, I think that was inherent, but that was a good way to get me out, right?
Okay, because there was a similar case actually that was one, but was raised by a jazzercise, like someone who'd done the certification program, and she was fat, and she basically lost her. I'm not remembering the details exactly, but they took her certification away. And the thing was that she wasn't representing like the fit lifestyle in her appearance. It's a long time ago. This is like in the early 2000s. I'll get the exact date and like you can maybe link to it in the show notes because I didn't review that before. But I think that your experience, like, and your uncle's kind of response, which I don't think is wrong, but it's really sad. Yeah. It reflects how much like the aesthetic appearance or, apparent appearance, I guess, of fitness is tied to what we presume to be healthy. And I don't think that's always the case, right? Like there's a real issue with presuming that someone's body, the way someone's body looks reflects their health or their fitness overall, but fitness to do a particular job. I don't know what your health situation was like.
Well, so good,
but I think that it's a problem. Like if there were real problems with you leading the class, then maybe you shouldn't be leading the class because you couldn't do it. But the idea that a fat person doesn't belong at the front of the room just because they're fat, I think is wrong. And it's prevalent. It's changing, but it is really widespread. An interesting piece of the book that like on that theme exactly is that like at the height of aerobics in the 1980s, there were a lot of fat women. And by the way, I use the word fat in the way that I've heard a lot of fat activists say that they're claiming it just as a descriptor, not as in the derogatory way.
I don't even take any offense to any of it. I was once on a podcast and I called myself morbidly obese, and she said, well, why are you using that language? She was so young. And I was like, I don't know. I'm old. I don't know. I don't think too much about it. I appreciate you. Everything. That's a beautiful correction.
But there was some fat women who like felt like wanted to participate in aerobics too, but felt totally unwelcome in like, dominant gyms. Also felt like the VHSs that were out at the time did not like reflect them in it, but also what they could do. And so they went to open their own studio, and they opened the studio called Women at Large. And at first they couldn't staff it because there were no women who looked like them. They wanted fat instructors, no women who looked at them to work there. So they went and got certified. Wow. They opened it, they released DVDs. And it's super interesting. Like they were really pioneers in terms of inclusivity. But I rely on another woman's wonderful research. Her name is Jenny Ellison on this. And she looks at the way that like it was in some ways a wonderful example of like kind of claiming space. But if you look at the way that at their and other studios, like the fat instructors were expected to talk and to present themselves, you see some of that like internalized fat hatred happening. Like one, there are all these like rewards for weight loss, you know, there's
Oh my
also
God. Yeah. The challenges.
right.
Yeah.
They couldn't use the term fat. They had to use the term like fluffy, I think, to
No.
describe the women there.
Come on now.
And then they also
Like we're
had
on
like
a sheep farm.
right. They had this very strict dress code that like they had to have a full face of makeup and wear like feminine colors and like, so it's just interesting, again, gains and pains to see like the steps forward that happen, but also like the things that we hold on to in terms of, you know, the limitations that fitness culture imposes upon us that we impose upon ourselves.
Well, and so I just also think about if you are feeling like, you know, you're not in the shape, you're carrying a lot of extra weight. I think it must feel so shameful. And I use shameful in the truest definition that I know of shameful, right? The primary function of the emotion of shame is to avoid rejection, right? That's its primary function. And I would imagine and I know this to be true for a different version of myself that's sitting here, but actually I've had long COVID, like, and I know I'm going to want to go back to my fitness regime, which is live. And I think there will be a sense of leftover shame when I'm in these classes with these people at higher levels of fitness than me. And I think this is a complete function. And I think there's even a part where, and this is really just my fat person talking, where when I'm in a fitness class and an instructor is saying to me, like, and if you can't do that, like go down and do this, like that feels so shaming to me. Like, no, we should. That's actually why I got trained in Intensati, because I just thought I had a different view of it. And I just do like low impact the whole time because my body can't take, because I've done such harm, you know, can't take it anymore. And I guess like, what's the historical part, or what are your thoughts on all that? I think it's so hard it feels like the mean girls click in some way, right? To get into these fitness studios.
Oh, totally. And of course we all bring our own like baggage and
for
stories.
Sure.
And because it's the body, it's like so intimate and intense, right? So people are coming in there with a lot. And I say that because it's interesting, because that like introduction of modifications, like that for you feels targeting and shaming, that was an innovation in order to like make people feel more welcome. Like,
isn't it
so funny? Show a progression.
Right.
Yeah. And clearly it doesn't work perfectly. And what's ironic is like, this is also fraught and complicated. And like to teach an exercise class, you know, you need like a certification you got in a basement somewhere for 2 days. Not that a lot of people don't have a lot more, but you're dealing with people on this really intense level. So, sorry, wait, you asked me where did like,
I was asking just in general, what you thought about this whole thing of how it is so exclusive, which by the way, you know, like is what sells it. But what about people? And I'm not even talking low socioeconomic status, which, you know, blows my mind. I'm just talking about like size, not that fit. And I was like, I mean, I went to Soul Cycle once. I was like, this ain't for me, because I felt so excluded, honestly. And that's like the most inclusive model that exists.
I mean, I don't think it's that inclusive.
Oh, thank you. That's very validating. I was like, this is not for me. No, thank you.
No, I don't think Soul Cycle has like, I actually think Soul Cycle is a decent example of the fact that in the fitness industry, there is in some ways a tension between getting as many people in the door as possible and like, you know, like expanding your business and serving a larger public, and selling your brand as deliberately exclusive and elite, right? And I think in the fitness industry, I mean, there are different brands that position themselves different ways, but there's a lot of brands stake on selling themselves as this is where the, you know, beautiful, thin, already fit people hang out. And if you're not that, or you're not like on your way to be that, like, no thanks. And there are a lot of people who will sign up because of that. Probably a lot more people like walk away with their tail between their legs. So like, I could never go there.
Like Molly Carmel, for example.
No, totally. But that's a very, very common experience.
And I'm like a fierce bitch, you know what I mean? Totally. And I can get totally brought down by that. I'm like, not for me, not here.
It's like there's an intimidation factor that I think some brands really lean into in what they're selling. Like, you know, this is like a tribe, a posse, a hardcore clique, like, you know, and I think that in like, I mean, lots of communities like draw boundaries in ways that resemble that. But I think in fitness, because it is so tied up with the physical, there's an outward expression of this that like can feel extra intimidating when you walk in the door and your body just looks different. Forget before they ask you where you went to school or if you're married or whatever, you know, how much money do you have?
Make, right.
You know, all of that kind of like, you know, like gatekeeping that can be a little bit more subtle. There's something about the fitness world because it's still so tied up with aesthetics and how you look.
And morality. I mean, I think it brings us back to the beginning, right? Because, you know, like you're good if you can get up on your toes in bar method class. And if, you know, you're doing you know, some kind of modification, it's like not so good. Right. And so then it leaves it just sort of, because I always think about, you know, my promoting when I do, you know, just doing eating disorder work all the time. It's like loving exercise for me back before COVID, you know, doing a hardcore Pilates class like SLT was like loving exercise to me. I could really chart that. I loved feeling my body. When I started yoga, it was actually the first body positivity thing I'd ever done. Like it really yoga and that was, but I think it's really hard to disseminate what loving exercise is with all this noise.
I love that idea. The phrase that I have come up with that I use a lot is exercise on your own terms. Like, you know, I think that is really helpful too, because we often have this like, you know, sense that like exercise is something done to you or something you subject yourself to. And I like working hard. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that sometimes that is self-love to like push yourself through an extra mile, et cetera. But I think when we focus too much on the pain of the process rather than on the gains that we might have or on what's like appropriate for that day, what's loving, as you put it, then we start to lose focus. And honestly, we'll probably stop doing it, because unless you're like a total masochist, like most people are not going to last that long at something that they truly despise or that feels like suffering. Or if they do, it probably is not going to ultimately redound to their health.
But then isn't there that part, and I'm so curious about the historical relevance of this, of if it doesn't feel painful, then it isn't working. I mean, I have so much left over. Like I take my dog on like a mile, you know, nature hike every morning. And I've worked through the thought, but you know, my first thought is this doesn't count as exercise because it's a gentle walk. I mean, it's literally dysfunctional, everybody, like eating disorder to the nines, but it's like, okay, well, what else am I going to do today? Because my hour walk doesn't, I mean, listen to this. Ready? I mean, this is because I'm with a friend. Yeah, it doesn't count.
Oh, totally.
Where did we learn this? Help me. I need to unlearn this. Treat me.
How about
Treat me, professor.
I left my Fitbit or my tracker at home, so it doesn't count.
Right,
because
doesn't count because I don't
clocked.
know. As though those things are like accurate, by the way.
Not real. I know 10,000 steps is made up completely. It was like a marketing campaign in the 60s in Japan.
Boy, really did it work.
I know, totally. So where does that come from? Well, it comes from, I think, a very powerful strand in exercise culture, which is, you know, if you don't have pain, there will be no gain. Like the point is to push yourself. This comes from a deeply American, we call it the Protestant work ethic, right? That unless like there is no salvation without work, right? That hard work will bring you, you know, positive outcomes. And that is so embedded in our kind of obsession with self-fashioning and with self-actualization through exercise. And I think it's why something like loving exercise feels so radical.
Radical. Isn't that funny? It is radical.
Yeah. And we should say also, this plays out differently for different people. I mean, you and I think two like white Jewish ladies in our 40s, right, have a particular relationship to this. But it's, I think, really important to realize, like, you know, if you have a disability, if you're Black, if you're a woman or a man, like you're all going to have kind of different relationships to all of this. But I think that this like no pain, no gain sentiment is really baked into this overarching American sense that like without work, there is no salvation. You must prove yourself through that labor.
Well, because it's the same stuff that, you know, all of these coaches are saying about, you know, dieting, right? Like this, like, if, you know, the starving, that's right up there with like the starving yourself and this cake is bad. And if you're eating a full meal, then there's something, you're not going to lose the weight. I mean, and it's just, I think I'm just amazed at how entrenched it is. It's just entrenched.
Totally. Well, we started off speaking about spirituality, and what is interesting is in the 19th century, like some of the first advocates of exercise as like part of living a good life are people from this movement called muscular Christianity. And the idea is, it's not that hard to imagine, but like disciplining the body through exercise is a way of showing your closeness to God, right? It's a way of disciplining the flesh. And I think it's interesting that exercise soon after that becomes seen as like almost deviant. Like if you exercise, you're probably like looking to pick up men. But it has that deep connection to kind of Protestantism, self-abnegation that I think is still very much with us in this punishing modality.
Oh yeah. And, and I always say to people, just to bring the word God in very gently, but it's like, what we're doing in this exercise obsession is like the scale is the God, the muscle mass is the God. It's like, it's just a really shitty God. And it's funny.
Totally.
Natalia, I was like thinking on that morning walk with my dog is the time I feel closest to God.
Oh, I love that. I got a chill when you said that.
It's such an interesting thing. And then yet there's this disordered part of my mind, this well-worn snow groove that says it doesn't count. I mean, how sad is that, right?
Well, I think sometimes life events will like trigger us into rethinking for ourselves what is our own terms, right? Like what does count? I mean, you're talking about long COVID. My experience in the pandemic, I did have COVID, not with like exercise impact, but I got a big femoral fracture, and then
I remember that. I love Instagram for this reason alone. I just know a lot about your life. Yes, I remember that.
I was effectively on like bed rest for almost 10 weeks with this thing. And like, then I came back and I was like walking, and that felt to me, I had gotten injured because I was like running 10 miles. And then I was walking and like, God, I felt so just like betrayed by my body, right? And like a failure. And then you start to pick yourself back up, hopefully, and like build the house again with a different attention to the pieces, I think,
Oh, definitely.
And to the benefits. I mean, once I could really walk again, my husband and I started going on walks together, and it's like the time we feel closest to each other, right? And we put on our little trackers, and it does or it doesn't count as our workout that day. But the point is, it's not about the counting in terms of like the exertion. It's about how it fits in to the rest of your life and what it brings you, And I think your point about your dog and God, and that's, I think, the stuff that you'll stick with, and the stuff that probably feeds your soul most.
Yeah. And I was, I think my relationship to my body and to exercise, it has been a long evolution, and I've had to do so much work about it.
Yeah.
And like, and I don't actually believe, I know this to be true for me and mostly everyone I've treated, but like this idea of loving your body is just such a farce because it takes such a long time. It's like, can you just not hate it for a minute? Right? Like you can just start there, but like, do you talk about that at all in the book? Like
totally. I'm trying to remember.
Like the body love movement, this like such a shaming thing. Like if you can just not hate your body, you're really making progress.
I talk about it a little bit at the end, and I spent a good deal of time with a book you might be interested in called Fat is a Feminist Issue from like 1977. You probably have read it. And I want to go into it now, but yes, I think you bring up a really important issue that like loving yourself, loving your body is like a nice ideal, but unfortunately it comes wrapped up with like, oh, you don't love your body yet. What's wrong with you? Like are you not enlightened? Right? Are you not feminist enough? Are you caught up? Have you internalized these things? And also it's so physical. Like it's also like putting so much about your self-worth on like relating to your physical self. Some activists have gone to talk about body neutrality, which I think is a little bit,
I think it's really interesting.
Helpful.
I think it can move you closer. I was just thinking about when I started to feel better from the long COVID. And I think this is just not to sell it all day, but I think a lot of this has to do with intensati because it's such a practice of, it brings so much gratitude in. I don't know that I've ever been grateful for breath except for after having long COVID, like
totally
to breathe is such a gift that I didn't know that I had. And now when I'm teaching and I'm just able to breathe so well, I'm like, this is amazing. Just as such to say to everybody is like, yes, we are talking about such crazy entrenched parts of our culture. And I think with a lot of like mindfulness and desire, you can break out of this to some extent, at least your second thought can, right?
Yeah, I think the awareness is the big piece. Like,
Right.
what I've been, which is very intense, but like what I've been talking about this research for years now in different places, and hopefully I will a lot more now with the book.
I
But
hope
like,
so.
what I hope so too. And this is part of that. So thank you.
Fascinating.
But one of the things that to me has been so interesting, or people seem to find kind of enlightening, is like the gym writ large is such a part of the landscape of our everyday life, but we don't often stop to think about what that means. And this book is all about, this is a pause to think about what it means
Mm.
that you spend money on a gym membership, whether you go or not, what it means that you can look out at a gym at any time, and there are people that are running on treadmills, going
Anytime,
nowhere,
especially in New York
going
City.
nowhere.
Yep.
And
Going
like
nowhere, little rat
spending
at
money.
3 a.m. after they've, finished at the bank.
Yeah, like, and what is it? And I'm like one of those rats a lot
Me
of the
too.
times.
Me
Like,
too. I used to
what
be.
does it mean that the women all cluster in the studio and the men are out on the weight room? Like, what does it all mean? And so those are just a few examples. But I think, like, fitness is such an ubiquitous part of our life in 2022, but a largely unexamined one. And so I hope that this book will like give people some insights and have people take pause about the kind of practices they do or do not engage in. It's not only for gym rats.
Oh my gosh.
So I hope people enjoy it.
You're a genius. Here's what I want to do. I want everybody listening to write me, DM me on Instagram or on Facebook or whatever, and write me the questions you want me to ask Natalia for her second adventure with me. Cause I feel like we've scratched the surface, and I really want to know like what the community wants to know more about after this primary conversation. And also please pre-order Natalia's book. Can you tell us where we can find it?
Yeah, you can
Everywhere.
get it on Amazon, evil Amazon, I know.
Evil Amazon.
Fit Nation, The Gains and Pains of America's Exercise Obsession, or directly from the University Press site, which is University of Chicago Press.
Amazing. And we'll leave links in the show notes. And you are wonderful, and I adore you. And I'm just, my mind is blown from so much of this. And thank you for being my therapist today.
It's mutually, especially on a day like today, right? Recording when the Roe decision was handed down. So it feels really good to speak to you and talk about these issues.
And take our power back,
Yeah. Remember that the arc of history is long, gains and pains every step of the way.
Yes, Queen. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.